The KWEB in rally mode today. Chinese internet stocks closing 6% higher on an ETF basis. And check out the crazy move higher since the start of November. That index is rallying 55% in just about 1 month's time. So should you bet on what we're going to call a Beijing boom? Let's trade it. So, Tim, emerging markets, even though I guess it's the world's second biggest economy, we still call it an emerging market, though. Well,
it's acted like it. And if you look at the headlines out of the government, you know, we've said this. Investing in Alibaba hasn't necessarily been about looking at the PE ratio and the slowdown in China e-commerce. It's really been about the attack on the company. And I think if you look across the e-commerce space, Tencent, which at one point I argued was the world's most interesting tech company because it was an incubator, it was a platform, it was a social network, and they also were under the thumbnail of the government. Quickly, I tell you, when Ant Financial basically was fined $1 billion a couple weeks ago, to me, that is the final settlement, the ring kissing. I think investing in China internet is back in. And I also think that some of these companies have done what they need to do with U.S. regulators on the accounting side. There's a lot of bustle back and forth in terms of them getting delisted and whatnot. I think right now, if you look at the KWEB, I think you can stay in this trade because I think China also is the only central bank in the world that's easing. So EM is outperforming. That's where I've been allocating money over the last 3 weeks to a month and a half, and I think that trade continues to go higher.
Jeff Mills, I'd like to get your take on this because at various points over the last couple of years, the narrative has been around for China investing about the regulatory crackdown, specifically against big tech by the government. And then it became more recently, and rightfully so, the economic effects of the zero COVID policy there. So as things shake out, we talked about, is it investable, is it not? Is it investable? Have these things kind of cleared up in your mind?
So the changing of the policy landscape has been kind of front of mind for me for a while. So I'm not going to get all bulled up on China just because of the recent price move. But that being said, so looking at KWEB, anything below 25 times on a PE basis has historically been very, very low. Now, we all know valuation isn't going to help from a timing perspective, but I've been looking elsewhere in the market for signs of what Tim is talking about relative to some of the stimulus that we know is coming in 2023, some of the easing of the zero COVID measures. The 10-year in China is bottoming. Interesting. Certain other clues. Some of these resource names, so Glencore, Rio, BHP, even some of the U.S. steel names, those charts are starting to wake up after a very, very long time. And I all think it might be indicative of what we're seeing in China and some of these changes that are happening, at least from a stimulative perspective and from an economic perspective as we move into 2023. Again, I don't think it's all systems go, but I do think you can stick with the trade, at least for the next couple months.
Well, I mean, Courtney, what do you think? Is China a go?
Yeah, I've been really optimistic on China and the emerging markets in general, and I do think you're finally getting some good opportunities here. The valuations are low, the dollar's weakening, all which is a good sign. Rather than KWEB, though, I actually would look at a broader emerging markets fund, and you look at like some of the top holdings in KWEB. You're going to look at your Tencents, your Alibabas. You're also going to get that in your emerging markets, like whether it's iShares or Vanguard has something very similar, but also you're going to get like a Taiwan Semi in there as well, which I think is something you really want to make sure you're invested in as a whole.
Don, we don't take ourselves too seriously, and therefore I'm going to point out that on the night we had the "Is China uninvestable?" I think that was probably the low.
The low, yeah, exactly.
The buy signal. But that was the day when the government also reached out and did not only another zero COVID policy, but they leaned on Alibaba, et cetera. Everything's been rallying ever since.